Hello and welcome everybody to our today's discussion on representing Russian culture in video games. Today we'll be talking about how Russian culture, Russian history, Slavic folklore, Soviet history and culture are represented in modern video games, such as Indika, Atomic Heart, The Witcher. Well, The Witcher is a topic on its own and we'll get to it very soon. And before we begin, there are two things I think that are important to notice. That first is that the video games is a new, fresh media which is yet to be studied and understood properly. And the thing is that apart from movies and television and books and theater, video games provide a unique experience for every player and an ability to be involved personally into a process of participating in a video game, in enjoying video game. For any person is his personal experience. So directing this unique experience for every human being is a tricky thing to do. For a director, for a creator, especially when the purpose of a video game is to represent one culture or mythology or history and do it in its best ability in a way to be praised and beloved by the video game audience, by the players. So whenever we're speaking of something strange and weird here, or just really unique and original, it's due to the fact that every person who created one of the games we're speaking about has his own point of view on the Russian culture or Slavic culture or Slavic mythology or Soviet culture. So they might vary, and that's completely normal, because eventually the purpose is to share, communicate, exchange ideas, cultural references, introduce people from all over the world to specific parts of Slavic, Russian, or Soviet history, culture, mythology, etc. And the second thing that is very important for today's conversation is memes, or as usually called in Russian, meme, because originally this term was not used to describe funny pictures in the internet. It was used to describe the smallest unit of information. And it was introduced by the scholar Richard Dawkins in his book, The Selfish Gene from 1976, which basically said that any smallest unit, any smallest particle of culture might be called a meme. So let's say a sushi is a meme for Japanese culture, because no matter how much or how little a person knows about Japanese history or culture, when he sees a square rice thing with a fish, he's thinking about Japan the way how he sees it. So, for example, for Russian culture, Baba Yaga is a meme, or Ushanka hat is a meme, or AK-47 is a meme. That's something that contains a representation of the culture in its own. So whenever we see this small emblem, we know that it's part of one specific culture. So I think that video games is a very fast-paced media, which basically means that you have to include as many information into every bit of this video game to well, I wouldn't say manipulate, to direct the attention of the gamer. So working with memes when you are representing one specific culture or mythology is incredibly important, and we'll be using this word really often today. So let's get from the very beginning. The most important game for introducing the audience from all over the world to Slavic mythology, Slavic culture and folklore was, of course, The Witcher series, developed in Poland by CD Projekt Red, originated in the late 2000s, and then developed and evolved throughout 2010s up to 2015, when The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt was released. It's one of the emblematic Polish video games, one of the legendary successes of the scene, which introduced millions of players all over the world to Slavic folklore, introduced such wonderful creatures as Leshins, Yagas, Kikimeras, Utoptses, etc. Set in really somber tones with elements of dark fantasy, it created a unique atmosphere for any player who saw at that point of their lives the Slavic mythology, the Slavic culture as something completely exotic. Because after all, let's say most people more or less are introduced to some specific mythologies like Nordic mythology, Indian mythology, um, ancient Greek mythology, and the memes from these cultures are pretty well established as on modern medias like TV and books like Gaiman's books on modern gods, and many video games, popular video games such as God of War, etc. So The Witcher did the thing that introduced a big part of video gamers to the Slavic mythology. Even though there were games on this subject before The Witcher was released, such as Knyaz series, for example, that originated in late 90s. So apart from a huge success and introducing millions of people to the Slavic mythology, it's a big pride and honor to Poland, to the country of Poland. For example, when the American president Barack Obama visited Poland in 2011, the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, presented him with a copy of Witcher 2, which is a significant thing. It's basically a cultural emblem, a cultural icon for Poland nowadays. But it's very important for us because basically it opened gates for various creators from all over the world who are fascinated with Slavic mythology or Slavic history, Eastern European history from 18th, 17th, 19th century and 20th century, and allowed to portray this civilization, this atmosphere, this mythology in a way honest, involved, and excited. So let's look at one of the latest and, in my opinion, finest examples of video games like that. It's going to be the Black Book, released in 2021 by Russian studio Morteshka, which tells us a story about Vasilisa, who is Znatka. Znatka is a specific word coming from Perm region in Russia, which means basically a witch, a female wizard, lady wizard, who knows the ways of ancient magic and can use it for good or for bad, to help people or to punish people, to do good things or to sign some contracts with the evil forces that lurk somewhere in the darkness. So Vasilisa's story is basically based on folklore, fairy tales, very typical, very popular in Russian and Slavic fairy tales and mythology, when a young maiden is saving her beloved one from death, basically bringing him from the death kingdom back to the world of the living by crossing some borders, meeting some devilish and frightening creatures. So that's the story of Vasilisa. To describe the gameplay process, I guess I'd show a bit from it from the trailer released in 2021. Sharing my screen, just a second. So there we have it, a small presentation of this video game that shows a little bit of visual poetry used in it, a little bit of portrayal of Russian life somewhere in the middle of 19th century, I'd say, from the village folk perspective. So Vasilisa is a wizard lady who lives in these places in Perm. And her daily occupation, her duty and her work is to protect people from her village and from this region from various evil forces and demons and leshis and kikimaras and creatures such as that. So from a gameplay perspective, it's a deck building RPG, a role-playing game when the player chooses whether to play as Vasilisa as a honest, helpful, caring person, or selfish witch that uses her power only to dominate other people and achieve her own goals without caring too much about people around her. But what's interesting here for us is that apart from using the well-known Russian memes, such as the fields with grains and the churches, lonely churches standing somewhere in the wilderness. It also works a lot with representing the regional cultures of Russia, such as Permak culture, with its mixture of Russian Slavic folklore and Finnish-Hungarian myths, using a lot of words that are typical specifically for this region. The game has a glossary, a vocabulary that you might use to see the words you don't know, and some Russian-speaking people wouldn't know these words. Let's say, for example, urochishe is a specific word that is used specifically in that region, or was used, or bannik, for example. Bannik is a spirit who lives in banya, in Russian sauna. So, even though this video game works with very, very specific subjects, lesser known to a broader audience all over the world, it's an indie game developed by a very small group of people. It still have become really, really popular for an indie game. It was sold with over than 175,000 copies all over the world, and it was highly praised and rated in the United States, basically because people are interested in exchanging the cultural references, portrayal of cultures that they might see as exotic. And what's even more interesting here for now is that even for a Russian gamer, this game, the Black Book, represents part of Russian culture, lesser known for a broader Russian audience, because it has a lot to do with specific regional Permak Finnish-Hungarian mythos. The fairy tales are a big part of modern Russian video games that get distributed all over the world, that are popular in the United States. One of the fine examples is Vasilisa and Baba Yaga, released in 2024, which gathers basically the summary, the essence of Russian folklore type of illustrations for fairy tales, like Vasnetsov and other great Russian artists, well-known or lesser known all over the world, and creates aesthetically a book you can play while following the history of Vasilisa through, obviously, the kingdom of the dead, obviously to save her relative, in this case, mother. Vasilisa is running away from her evil stepmother. and faces a lot of dangers and menaces on her way. So the fairy tale part of video games about Slavic folklore and Russian culture is a popular thing right now. Another example would be Reka, the game that is currently in the early access about the student of Baba Yaga. And Baba Yaga, as everybody knows, is a witch who lives in a house with chicken legs near the forest. And Reka is her student who is about to learn the witchcraft. And the game, just as Vasilisa and Baba Yaga, has some sort of meditative, melancholic sort of narrative when the character would explore the world around him and just have a deep dive in this Slavic atmosphere of somewhat somber and at the same time comforting tones. The very important part of these video games is, of course, the soundtrack that uses a lot of folklore motifs, a lot of folklore structure, adding some electronic music to it, and thus expanding it, creating a new media where the old forms of storytelling are combined with modern waves to expand it. So these are basic Slavic folklore, Russian fairy tales, myths that are used in video games. So we can see some patterns here using the well-known characters and trying to explain, to translate them, or to interpret them for a broader audience by adding some modern music or by creating a fantasy, dark fantasy sort of world around them, or using stylized pictures like in Vasilisa and Baba Yaga to easier the entry point to the world of Slavic culture, which involves, excites, captivates so many people from all over the world. But when we're talking about memes, we shouldn't forget about the second actual meaning for this word, which is something funny, bizarre, sometimes even crazy, basically things that get completely over the top with its representation of various cultures. So a brief but very exemplary performance here, exemplary example here would be Rus versus Lizards, Ruсы против ящеров, released in 2023, which basically creates a completely over-the-top, absurd representation of, let's say, a representation of Russian mythology with too much investment of crazy ideas and bizarre realization. Basically, it's not a satire per se, but it's an ironical depiction of some conspiracy theories, of some modern ways to portray Russian culture. It's very postmodern, very over the top, so good it's bad type of video game that basically mocks these cliches about bogatyrs, Russian heroes, about some evil force from outer spaces, mocking a popular format of conspiracy theories such as reptiloid race of invaders and things like that, by doing a game that is completely unplayable, really badly done, but at the same time so funny that it can be forgiven. Another small example of that would be interpretation of Slavic folklore by a Bulgarian studio that created Yaga video game. Once again, Yaga is a very important meme for understanding Russian culture. Basically, everybody involved in studying Slavic folklore knows about Baba Yaga because she's so emblematic. Which tells us, and this game, Yaga, it tells a story about a blacksmith named, of course, Ivan, who is fighting his way to get rid of the curse fallen upon him. And on his way, as you might see on the picture, he's fighting, for example, a bear with balalaika, another good example of over-the-top meme, which every person from Eastern European, Slavic, or post-Soviet country knows is completely bizarre representation of Russian culture. And at the same time, it's a funny, ridiculous way to introduce people to the most outstanding over-the-top memes from these countries and cultures. So another video game that is far less comic, but at the same time very artistic and beautiful in its nature is, of course, the video game called Indika, released in 2024, which tells a story about end of 19th century nun who experiences the crisis of faith and decides to leave her monastery. And at the same time, she's being seduced by the devil, who follows her, who speaks with her, who analyzes her, trying to expose her weaknesses. And her story is a journey through a very grotesque, a very scenic and phantasmagoric world based on Russian 19th century history. This game was really praised for its artistic value all over the world, was noticed and studied, and let's see a trailer for it.
Привет. Let me tell you about Indika. Who is she, you ask? Well, she's a nun. A rather plain one, if you ask me. She prays a lot, works hard. Really hard. On top of that, she's obedient and humble. Goodness, she even finds some time to chat with, what do you call it? Chot. Poor girl. Of all the boring places, why do you want to go to heaven?
So this is a completely different example of working with cultural references and memes of a specific time period and specific culture and history. Indika is darker. It is more avant-garde, I'd say, representation of Russian culture, which is based on the style the creators of the video game have called Tsar punk, which is a reference to popular cultural movements like cyberpunk, steampunk, etc. So what is Tsar punk? Is basically taking the elements of how we imagine the history of 19th century in Russia and making them grotesque, bigger, menacing sometimes. And the reason to do that, according to the directors, is to portray the parts of common life of 19th century that are most important to people living in this period, that were most important to people living in this period, bigger than they actually appear. So here on the pictures, we might see a huge chicken eggs in some sort of hangar or something like that, which look more like ostrich or more like dinosaur eggs. And according to the directors, the idea was to show how big in the lives of people living in the 19th century were these or that elements of their common life, of their daily routine. So let's say a dog that Indika meets on the empty street on the picture to the right is huge. It's like a crocodile. And the reason for that is that the fear of the stray dogs, the menacing invasion from the wilderness was so big in the mentality of a person living in the 19th century. It was bigger than it actually was. It was seen as something really, really frightening and menacing. So by creating this bizarre and somewhat absurd world of Tsarpunk, the creators of Indika are changing the representation of culture as its own to the representation it from the eyes of the person living there. So instead of just observing as players or watchers or audience, we are seeing it through the eyes of a person who lives in the end of 19th century Russia, who has his fears, ambitions, goals, and who is experiencing bad case of faith crisis, who is questioning morals, who is afraid of changes coming to the world and to Russia. And well, the depiction of the world is just the way to show how Indika sees it. So from Slavic and 19th century Russia, let's move on to 20th century, where we have much less to do about folklore and much more to do about culture, history, representation of history, with the modern representation of the USSR, the Soviet Union, the Cold War, and things like that. So there are numerous examples of depicting the world of Soviet Union, the culture of Soviet Union. There are numerous ways how it's portrayed in video games made in Russia, and there are ways how it's portrayed in video games made abroad, mostly doing something with the history of the Second World War. And of course, it's important to mention here Metro 2033 series, which are set in Moscow Metro and Moscow subway, Stalker series, and here we have another example, RPG called Atom RPG, released in 2017, which has a lot to do with representation of late stage Soviet Union in 1970s, 1980s, with somewhat dark alternative history tones. But I guess the most emblematic, the most popular, especially all over the world, in the United States, is the recently released Atomic Heart game, released in 2023 by Mundfish, which is basically a combination, the essence of all the Soviet culture emblems, all the smallest particles and memorable features of the Soviet routine, life, aesthetics, poetry, etc. Visual poetry, of course. So, for example, on this picture, we can see almost identical screenshots and photos from the 1st of May, Первомай parade in Russia. On the pictures to the left, we see how it's represented in the Atomic Heart, and on the pictures to the right, the actual picture of 1st of May parade, of the Labor Day in Soviet Union parade. So this pompous picture of the Soviet Union is not created in propaganda purposes. Even more so, we can say that there's some sort of a debunk of this propaganda. There's inner questioning in the video game of whether it was as perfect as it might be seen on the pictures. It's through very unusual ways. Atomic Heart is trying to explore what was real and what wasn't real in the ways we see the history of 20th century in the world and in Russia. And this video game does so by using, destructing, and recollecting the cultural emblems, the memes from the Soviet Union period. So let's take a look to that here with the screenshots from the video game. So what are Soviet memes? What are important particles of our of the way we see the history, the culture, aesthetics of the Soviet Union, and what is important for Monfish to portray in their own way in their game Atomic Heart. So obviously we can start with Baba Yaga's house. Here we see izbushka on chicken legs, but in the modern way it's portrayed, it doesn't have chicken legs. It has a jump pack, or I don't know, rocket fuel under it that helps it fly and escape the dangerous robots that are attacking our characters throughout the game. Another Soviet meme, big part of aesthetics, is of course the carpet on the wall, originally used to basically make the apartment warmer. It became some sort of a decoration for people who were raised in the Soviet Union in the 20th century, or to say so, in the second half of the 20th century. And here we might see the protagonist of the game all together with a famous or infamous Baba Zina sitting on the sofa, and a carpet is behind them. And Baba Zina is another meme well known in the United States and all over the world. It's a meme, this babushka, as it's being called, babushki, of a person wearing this type of attire, of a person being tougher than she looks like. And of course, with the style and aesthetic approach Atomic Heart has, it is only obvious that Baba Zina, Granny Zina, as she's called in the translation, is using AK-47 to fight off the robots attacking them. Another thing that is important and interesting here is the representation of cultural emblems, of making homages and references to popular media. And in the Atomic Heart series, it is a big part of the world created by the Monfish. So, for instance, the device that is used by the main character, by the protagonist, to unlock some traps or doors to get into specific rooms, has a depiction of a robo-rabbit, I guess, from the Nu Pogodi series, extremely popular in the Soviet Union, from this specific episode where usually nice and fun to be around rabbit, the one of two main characters in the game, is being, well, basically replaced by a terrifying robot rabbit that is dangerous and frankly really frightening. At the same time, episodes from the Nu Pogodi cartoon are being broadcasted on the television inside the game. So whenever the player sees the TV in some room in the scientific research lab he is exploring, he might turn it on and see a full episode of the Soviet cartoon, which was a big influence and a big and had great importance to developing the Atomic Heart series. Another thing, of course, is how the creators of this video game worked with music in game. Basically, the whole soundtrack of the game is remixes and new versions of old Soviet pop music, including Alla Pugacheva, including the song Trova u Doma, and many, many others that were popular in the period of 1970s, 1980s in the Soviet Union, and basically created some sort of audio background to the common life of the Soviet citizen. But apart from just using homages to various Soviet movies, cartoons, music, memes such as 1st of May parade, or I don't know, pioneer aesthetics, what Atomic Heart is doing as well, as it explores in depth through really postmodern, but at the same time really wholesome way, the myth of the Soviet Union, the idea on which this country was based in the 20th century, the idea of the garden, which is, as we might recall from Mayakovsky's poem, "Я знаю, город будет, я верю, саду цвесть." There is, I believe that there will be a city. I know that the garden will blossom. So this garden is a metaphor that is thoroughly explored in the Atomic Heart aesthetics by depicting the world the characters are living in, this alternative history future of the Soviet Union that continues its existence in 21st century, by showing in the beginning of the game everything so green and blossoming and bright and sunny, people are parading and celebrating, there's multiple gardens, fountains, parades, everything is completely perfect. At the same time, through the game, the deeper the character goes, the deeper the player explores the world, he sees more and more alternative ways how this garden metaphor is represented. For example, with carnivorous predator type of plants that attack the player in the middle of the game, through the deep laboratories hidden under the ground where some inhumane experiments are being conducted. And that, of course, involves some work with how this part of the world culture and the Eastern European culture is represented in modern medias. So in 20th century, there are a couple of similar depictions of the same aesthetics. For example, in the novel by Zamatin, these aesthetics of the garden are basically a foundation of dystopian society where everything is based on some sort of science that excludes all the humanity from the society and makes people basically living like machines, like robots in their own life, instead of expressing their ideas, experiencing some mistakes. Everything is removed and replaced by this perfect garden structure world. Or in the movie by the Soviet Georgian director Georgi Danelia, Kinzadza, we might see another garden with actually somewhat similar message to the viewer when the characters get on this planet, which is covered with beautiful flowers, and the population of this planet are wonderful, beautiful people with honest and kind intentions. It is being discovered that all the flowers are basically, they were former people who were destroyed and turned into the flowers to put on this planet to make it so beautiful, so blooming, so pretty, which is another, of course, way to question the idea of the garden, just as the Atomic Heart does. And in the recent movie, the adaptation of the classics by Mikhail Bulgakov, The Master and Margarita, in the movie that was released a couple of years ago, these aesthetics of grotesque, humongous, retro futuristic emblems of the Soviet Union are a big part of aesthetics, showing the domination of the idea over the normal, routine, common life of the living human being. So due to an extreme success of the Atomic Heart, on all the platforms like PC, consoles, Steam, you name it. Its popularity in the world, millions of copies sold. The game is really popular in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, in most countries and the most markets. Of course, the sequel of the game is in production, and it was recently released on the Summer Game Festival in the United States with thunderous applause and with triumph. Altogether with this, of course, spin-off version of the game is being released, which has less to do with culture or art, but at the same time, it is one of the examples of the popular media franchise coming from Russia, popular in the world, representing in its own very peculiar, very specific way Russian culture. And let's get to, well, let's say less successful in terms of copies sold, at least for now, and the game with smaller budget, but in my opinion, with certainly no less or maybe even more so interesting message ideas to tell to the gamer audience, which is called Militsioner. Which has, of course, another meme from the Soviet period in its structure. And this meme is Dядя Stepa, the depiction of a policeman, militsioner, who is helpful, who is basically capable of doing any great thing for people around him, who is always here for you, who is always around you. So the creators of the Militsioner game took this image and basically mixed it with one of Balabanov's movies by creating a Kafkaesque, scary, absurd, and surrealistic video game experience, which emerges the player into a small nameless town somewhere in presumably Russia, which is being watched over, controlled, and let's say guarded by a huge titanic figure, colossal figure of Militsioner, who sits above the city and takes care of it and never lets anybody out of the city. So the mission for the player is to escape the city, to live it, and to do so he can use various methods, including becoming friends with the policeman, earning money to get on the train to run away from the city, or even falling into romantic relationships with the policeman, with Militsioner in the skies. So I guess better than myself, the description of the game might be provided by the developers themselves. So I'll show what they have to say in one of the trailers for this video game.
Когда попадаем в эту игру, становимся невольными заложниками.
All characters in the game, including the giant, have a Tamagotchi-like mood system. Play with it, toll, give gift, smash their stuff. You can even befriend a giant. Everything is on the table. It's basically like a dating sim, where instead of a romantic relationship, you can go to jail. From the start, there are many escape routes waiting to explore. Time is the key. Everyone from cars and trains to people and giants has their own life schedules.
Словно реальная реальность. Когда попадаем в эту
So in this world of surrealistic Kafka-esque escape room, the main objective is to get away from the city and from the control and overwatch of the colossal giant raising above the character in the skies. And that's, of course, another take on reimagining the cultural emblem, the cultural reference, which most people born before 21st century know and understand pretty well, because it's, of course, a take on Dada Stjopa from a famous fairy tale poem for children, popular in the Soviet Union. So another thing to mention here about the Russian-based video games or games created by former Russian-based developers, or games that are just created out of respect and interest to Russian or Eastern European or Soviet culture, is that even when these games have nothing to do with depiction of the history per se, depiction of the cultural emblems, etc., they have a lot in common still. So even those video games that were just influenced by Russian culture, not necessarily created by Russians, or were created by people from all over the world, from other countries, is that whenever it has something to do with Eastern European or Russian or Slavic or Soviet culture, is that they are heavily literature textual based. So, for example, here we can see pictures from The Life and Suffering of Sir Bronte, a recent RPG by the Old Cat Games about the world of Warhammer 40,000, and a screenshot from the More Utopia video game, which all have the same thing in common, is that they are really going heavy on text, really trying to invoke some finest parts of Russian literature into the structure of this video game, such as psychologism, working with character psychology, exploring their deeper impulses, ideas, character traits, through depicting them in lengthy textual descriptions, which is far less work with facet of the emblem, and far more working with its inner core, its psychology, its psyche, its character, its nature. So even if the game is just inspired by the Russian culture, it still usually has something to do with working with language, exploring new ways to depict something. Sometimes in video games, for example, in the Rogue Trader, a game by All Cat Games that we might see here, based on the world of Warhammer 40,000, there are some literature ways to depict a character that were originated, for example, in the literature by Leo Tolstoy. The word alienation, остранение, or estrangement, is a literature trait that you can use to depict something from a peculiar perspective, yes, by making it stranger than it actually is. So the reader, or in our case, the gamer, might see it from a very different perspective, from very different eyes than his own. And this is used in various video games by Russian studios, or by other studios that were formed in other countries that are inspired with Russian culture. So I guess that's it for today that I have to say. I just want to summarize it by saying that once again, video games is a very modern, very fresh, very new media that incorporates a lot from movies, a lot from books, from theater, from music, obviously. And the game is a ultimate language that everybody understands, which allows people from various countries in the world, or various regions, like in the case with the Black Book, to share parts of their story, to share parts of their culture, to let them be understood by people from other countries and other cultures, and to share and exchange their own representation of their culture, or to see how their culture is represented by other people and learn from that and see how they are being seen by other people. And due to how video games are done and made, and due to how they're played, it's like music in many ways, a language everybody understands, because it's all about experience we are sharing and we are reliving every time we're playing a video game. So anybody who plays Militsioner, Atomic Heart, The Black Book, Vasilisa and Baba Yaga will have its own experience, will have its own understanding of this media. So thank you very much. Hello, there is no name. There is a question regarding the choices for games that are presented here. Well, basically, that's pretty much all the games on the subject that exist. I can't say that it's all there is to know, but at the same time, these are by far most popular, successful, the games noticed all over the world, the games presented on various gaming festivals, such as the Summer Game Fest, for example, the Atomic Heart. I believe Militsioner was presented on a recent indie game show in 2025, just as Reka, the game about Baba Yaga that was presented. But ultimately, the idea is to show how Slavic folklore, Eastern European folklore, Russian history, mostly Russian history of 19th century, and Soviet history of 20th century are represented in modern medias, in video games. Obviously, there are some video games with, let's say, another take on representing Russian culture, such as Smuta, for example. But in all honesty, I'm not sure that it's a worthwhile discussion due to the nature of this game and due to its many, many failures. Thank you, Bjarg 2, or okay. Thank you, Bjarg, for your comment. Yes, I completely agree that there is this discussion, but in all honesty, I think that this discussion is based on a false premise, because video games were culture in 1990s and were culture even in 1980s, and were art during that period as well. I mean, the biggest issue with video games is that it's very difficult for a person who doesn't play video games to understand that, because video games take a lot of time and a lot of effort from a person who never played it to actually participate the joy of playing video games and understand it deeper. It's not the same as watching a 2-hour movie, and it's not even the same as reading a 10-hour book. Many video games, even those presented here, require far more time spent on them. So basically, for people who understand this media, there is no question if it's art or not. It's just the discussion that comes from people who have, let's say, far less expertise in video games. Yeah, well, there were definitely depictions of Russia that are far less favorable for many Russians. It's an open discussion on its own. Let's say Call of Duty had both heroic representation of Russians and very, very critical. Battlefield, Bad Company, I can say I remember many out of that, but regarding Red Alert, I can't really say that it's a negative overview overall. I think in many ways, Red Alert is the same as the Atomic Heart, or is the same as Militsioner. It's a very much over-the-top, grotesque, and comic representation of Russia. I don't think that it has any propaganda attitude. It's basically mockery and satire on the way how Russia was actually represented in propaganda during 1950s and 1960s during Cold War. Just a second. What's a new question? Thank you for your presentation. Thank you very much for listening to it. What's something you'd love for global players to understand better about Russian culture and stories when they dive into these games? You know, in my opinion, the Russian games, they of course do represent some parts of Russian history and culture, but the thing they do best, in my opinion, is creating this unique atmosphere that cannot be recreated by a person who is not inspired by Russian culture. This atmosphere of somber tones, of melancholy, of huge expanse around you, the wind going through the grains on the field, and a campfire, a bonfire with shivering flame somewhere next to the forest. This part of, you know, special comfort taken from the depiction of Russian history and mythology that is wonderfully done in the Witcher series, though it's not Russian, of course. That is wonderfully done in the Black Book, because after all, the history of Russia is quite well studied. The literature of Russia is quite well studied, and video games, they allow you to have a deeper dive and immersive experience of exploring Russian culture. Thank you very much, Bjark, and thank you for your questions. So before we conclude, I'd say that apart from games shown here today, it's important to notice that not all games produced in Russia that are popular in the West and in the East or in the United States are necessarily based on Russian culture and history. A lot of Russian games that were made by people from Russia or that were inspired by Russian games and Russian culture. Indie games are extremely popular all over the world, like Potion Craft, like, let's say, Loop Hero. And thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for listening and participating and for your questions. We'll see you in the next video game events at AMC. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, and goodbye.